Let's get started. My guest today is feminist, mother, writer, singer-songwriter, Tera Johnson. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, what is your definition of feminism?
Honestly, it's just the dictionary definition, really, of the advocacy of women's rights with the basis of the equality of the sexes.
Okay, so does equality mean equal opportunity or?
Exactly. Equal opportunity. Pretty much everything shouldn't be based on the gender itself, but as a woman, just to have the opportunity to compete, whether it be in the workforce or at home, not necessarily based on her gender, but just on your ability.
Okay, so I guess the first question would be, what happens if the job that both a man and a woman are competing for happens to require physical strength or greater physical strength in general?
Exactly. So, that's the funny thing. I grew up on a farm, so I'll be the first one to say, there's certain things that it shouldn't matter, female or male, if you're not capable of providing that service or you're not able physically to perform the duties that are asked. I don't feel like that's a sexist thing. That's just a physical inability. Just as much as I would say, on the flip side, should men have babies? No, they don't have a uterus. So if we're not having a uterus, then let's not have babies. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, okay. So what made you become a feminist or become interested in feminism?
I think growing up again in the Midwest and with this very big mentality of women really are just there to have babies and stay home and really just it was that very old-fashioned 1930s, 1940s ideal of what women were. I really felt like that wasn't something that I wanted to support, and I didn't want to become that idea of a woman. So I decided to go to college in Boston, and I think just living in a very different atmosphere in a very different city and have access to so many different ideals, it really gave me a lot better of an understanding of what feminism was and is, and to see it less as a negative word and more as just a platform, just an even platform.
Okay, so there wasn't any kind of specific event or...
I wish I could say that there was a specific event other than, I think, just being around and having access to more material and seeing more women in an even academic as well as workforce. It wasn't so much that women were forced to be in those situations or forced to be in those work formats. It was just a choice. It was less about being forced into one category or another. This is just where women tended to reside.
Okay. So, one of the things is that it's kind of viewed as demeaning. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say it's viewed as demeaning to stay home and take care of the children and slop the goats or stuff like that?
Well, I think where I grew up, it wasn't an option. That's just where most women were. I can say that my mother was a nurse and my stepmother was an accountant, and I'm not to say that neither one of them were forced to stay home. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and most of my great grandmothers, that was just, there was no options. This is what you did. And being that the flip side, where my mom worked and my paternal grandmother worked, it wasn't even for them an option. They had to work based on the income. And my grandmother was a single woman and had 3 sons. Her husband had passed away in a car accident. So it was, again, less of a choice and more of a forced situation. And I think for feminism as a whole, it really isn't and shouldn't be about whether or not you stay home or go to work. It's not stay-at-home moms are not feminists and women that go to work are. It's just the choice that you feel that you have the option to make. And I think that's really what the bottom line was for me, is to feel like I had the option of what I want to do.
Right. Well, I mean, it used to be. I'm 36 years old, so I can only speak personally for the last, I guess, 30 years when my memory came online. But from what I'm aware of, it used to be that a woman was able to be taken care of by a man if they were married, but then they had I guess they became aware of, or it became more acceptable for them to go out and get a job if they chose to. But it
Right.
seems to me nowadays they don't have any choice whether to do that. They have to go out and get a job because,
Yeah, I think now it's become, but I don't think it's based on whether or not you're a feminist. I don't think that's what the force field is. It's financially, this is where we have to be. And it is a lot harder to have a single income, and that doesn't matter whether you're male or female. I think the also flip side is when women are at home for that period of raising children, when they get back into the workforce, it becomes more challenging because you've been out of it for such a long stretch. And I think that's the part that's become it's just we're just in a whole different atmosphere for financial reasons, for just what work opportunities and competitions there are to get those good jobs and to make the decent income that you were making before you became a stay-at-home mom.
right. It occurs to me that women have really only been in the workplace with men for about 40 years. I guess second wave feminism in the 1970s. And, Mary Tyler Moore and
Right.
all of that. But it's not really a lot of time to gauge whether or not the same expectations or what men find acceptable will also be acceptable to women. I've heard that, this whole Me Too movement is kind of a reaction to the harassment in the workplace of women has reached a boiling point. And this Me Too movement, while it kind of started in Hollywood with the Harvey Weinstein thing, it's kind of moved, it's grown. And it's now including all, the workplace in the United States. Do you think that's going to, well, first of all, do you think the Me Too movement is ultimately going to end up harming women's ability to get a job because maybe men may be reluctant to hire women because they're afraid that they could be slapped with a sexual harassment suit? Or
I don't think so. I think men as a whole have that choice as to whether or not it'd be one thing if a woman came up to a man in a workplace, or if there was a woman that was a CEO or a manager or whatever that was a man's boss, and came up to him and made some pretty sexual advances and or any type of negative references based on a man's sexuality, would really become an issue, right? So really, I don't think it should be the same issue for women to have, is it going to be difficult for women to get jobs? Sure to high hell hope not, because it really shouldn't be based on men feeling inferior. It should just be about the integrity as an employer. If you're an employer and you're a man, are you going to make advances at another man? And if you're straight, and if you're gay, would you do the same? I think it shouldn't matter as long as you can keep your basically keep your dick in your pants is the only way I can say it.
Well said.
Really just keep your hands to yourself and treat the person that you're employing the way you want to be treated. You don't want to be treated with disrespect. You want to be treated as an equal, and that you're able to provide information, work, whatever. You want to bring yourself to the table and be respected. So I don't think it should be that issue.
Right. I think whenever you say equal, I mean, you're meaning in terms of mental output. Right. I mean, okay, good. Well, in that respect, I think it's pretty obvious that men and women are equal in that respect. So, yeah, in the workplace, it seems as though if men, I am going to have to generalize, I guess, but men maybe who are doing the hiring, they could potentially be afraid if they don't hire enough women that they could be seen as sexist. And in that respect, it's not an equal playing field. I agree that that's not something that, it's interesting. I just had a conversation with a client yesterday about that very issue. And one thing that I think would be a very interesting concept
for HR across the board, or for anybody hiring, would be to really take away somebody's name from their resume. And if you're able to have people go through, just like college, and you're able to have people go through strictly based on, would you hire this person because of their credentials and what they're able to bring to the table, what their objectives are, what their history and experience would be, versus what's their name, which is the first thing, because that automatically oftentimes can become divided in, okay, that's a male name or a masculine name versus a feminine. So I don't know if I want to hire the female or if I don't want to hire the male because we have too many. Then you're really setting more of an even playing field by basing your hiring on credibility versus your gender and or your sex, whatever. So yeah.
Well, I think that's a good idea. The only problem I could see with that is that eventually it's going to have to come down to a point where the boss or whoever's doing the hiring is going to have to see, well, who am I calling?
Right. But oftentimes that can be the quick divider, like you were just saying a minute ago, on how, what if women aren't allowed, or too many women are rejected, versus, we have to have a certain amount of men, we have to have a certain amount of women. Well, okay, let's not make it based on that for the moment, and let's just base it, again, people's skill and what they're bringing to the table. Right.
Okay. So have you ever been a victim of what is it? Sexism?
Sexism?
Yes.
I worked in the music industry for about 10 years before I swapped out and moved away. I lived in Los Angeles for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I can say I was very fortunate compared to a lot of friends that I know worked in the industry with me. I didn't work particularly in the creative department. I worked more in the admin for about 7 years. And I can't say I personally experienced it, but I definitely saw a lot of it, particularly, again, based on, again, we want eye candy. We like women. We like women to look a certain way. Hence why, again, I personally didn't want to work in creative, because I didn't want to have to dress a certain way and have a certain look to go out. My husband worked in creative for about 10 years. And when he was in the creative field, 10 minutes, he'd throw on a t-shirt and a pair of jeans and go watch a band. For a woman to go, you want to look sexy. You have to have a certain edge about you. I wasn't interested in being that person. So I think the sexism may have been more subtle for some and more in your face for others.
Well, that reminds me, my wife and I have started watching the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It's an Amazon Prime show.
Okay, yeah, uh-huh.
And it's quite good. We've just watched the first episode, but there's one part where she gets out of bed while her husband's asleep. She puts on a face mask, she does her hair, and then she goes back to sleep while he's still asleep. And then she wakes up about 10 minutes before he does, and she takes it all off, the cold cream and or the mask, and she gets back into bed. So whenever he wakes up, it appears as though she's perfect. And I'm asking my wife, and I'm like, why do women do that? Why do women feel the need to have makeup all the time? Is that social pressure by men and women, or is it only women? Is it men, not being used to seeing women without makeup? And I don't understand that.
It's interesting. It's funny you say that, because it made me think of, have you seen Grace and Frankie as a show also on Netflix?
I'm familiar with it.
Just this season, their first or second episode of this season, Jane Fonda's character does the same thing with her boyfriend, and she gets herself all done up. So when he wakes up, so I haven't seen the show you're talking about, but I understand the principle. It's interesting, because I think historically, or in a certain era of women in the 40s and 50s, it was very much like that. You want to look a certain way. You want to make sure that you're always pretty. It's almost like the joke. I don't know if you've ever read I don't know if it was a true Good Housekeeping article from the 50s, but it was basically, you want to look good for your husband. You don't talk, how to be the good wife. You make sure that you have this meal brought home for him, and don't talk, don't tell him your problems. You just need to understand that he's the one that's really needing more of the attention. So I can see that it being an era issue, depending on the program. I think it also depends on the woman. Some women are very sensitive and to their appearance, and they're very sensitive to what Hollywood, magazines, the beauty industry, the fashion industry, how they depict women as a whole, and thinking that women do have to look a certain way in order to be defined as beautiful. I think in particular, especially now, we see a lot of Botox and basically this fear of getting old. Old suddenly defines beauty. And I think that's become something that has made women feel even more advanced into, okay, what cosmetic can I put on so that I can no longer look like this aged crone? And I think that's something that cannot have to do with era and can just strictly be, opinion. I'm not one of those people. I'm usually one of those opposites where I feel like, I think age is a beautiful thing. In fact, I see more women that do Botox and hair dyes. And when I lived in LA, tons of face implants. To me, that was so unattractive. It did not define beauty. If anything, it was the polar opposite. And it made women look less attractive in my mind and more afraid of who their next phase, their next cycle, their next lunar cycle, so to speak, of womanhood. And what a beautiful thing to look at yourself in an aged form instead of this one-dimensional person.
Right. It always seemed to be such an unnecessary hassle. I mean, I personally saw it as being unnecessary because if you put on makeup and you ended up, attracting a man, eventually that man's probably going to have to see you without your makeup. And,
right.
Then it's like, whoa, that could be drastic, or it could, I don't know, too much makeup is always off-putting. But when it comes to a woman's role in the workplace, do you think that men might see women competing for the same jobs with resentment because now their place in society is unsure? Now if women are able to do everything, because I can speak from personal experience. In the classroom or from my parents' example growing up, men are always both of my parents worked, by the way, but the men are supposed to take care of the household and at least have something to do, have a role to play. And if both people, now the shift has been so drastic and so sudden. I think that many men are having a difficult time coming to terms with, wow, everything, the way I was raised is not the way of the world today. It's like, this is not the world I was.
I think everything really depends on, it's a relationship based, it varies based on the relationships, because I can say for perfect example, like I said, when I was in college, I was so adamant about I want to make a difference. I don't want to be that person that stayed at home. And I worked my butt off and worked my way up the corporate ladder in the industry, in the entertainment industry. And once I got there, I felt like this is so not what I want to do. I worked really hard to get to this point, but I want to have kids, and it's important to me to stay home. That's my own personal feeling. And initially, I remember my husband and I having that conversation, and his initial reaction was, well, wait a minute. When we had initially talked, I thought that we were both bringing home an income. And to summarize it, we really kind of came to this conclusion that it was an organic, gradual transition to, I'm home primarily now. I do a lot of independent work and I do a lot of freelance work, which is great. But as a whole, is he the primary provider? He is. But would I consider, is it a traditional home? I suppose, but I guess my husband also never made it a requirement. He didn't make that. It wasn't me feeding his ego, and it wasn't him deflating mine. It was just a matter of organically, this is where we are. It made sense for us. And I think that should be the main premise of all relationships, and having that conversation and communicating, which truthfully, I see that in friends and as a whole around articles that I read about in relationships. And the number one problem is people not communicating and not telling each other what they want. I think internally, even women, there are some women that really do want to be in the workforce and really want this high positioned job, but they don't want to say that because they don't want to offend their husband or their partner. that's unfortunate. You shouldn't have to feel like whatever your dream or aspiration is, it shouldn't be something that you have to base your partner, make that be your sole person to focus on. So I think it really depends on from person to person.
Right. I mean, one of the things that if a woman has achieved a high level, a position in any industry, I can think of that is the business or the company that becomes their child. That becomes so. But obviously, there are a number of occasions when women are able to have a family and a high status position, and people always say, well, she has it all. She's able to do it all. You never really hear that from men. And I can understand that.
I have to say, one of the interesting conversations I've had, and it sometimes even sounds contradicting to myself, is, anybody that says you can have it all is is really walking on a very slippery slope, because nobody has it all. You're going to lose something. And that doesn't mean it's bad. You just have to accept the realities. So some women that say, I can't remember the woman's name, but Sandberg. When
Sheryl
she had
Sandberg?
the Lean In, when she had her Lean In book, women can have it all. Well, let's be careful when we say that. You can have it all by definition of you're financially secure, you're financially independent, you have this really great job. But I'd really like to see a fast forward in your life of about 20 years when your children are grown and see how that relationship is. And that's not based on her being at work all the time. You have to accept that there's certain trade-offs that you're getting there. You may not be that primary caregiver for your child. You may have a nanny do it. I can say, living in LA, I can't tell you how many women that was their main focus, was a nanny. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's a choice you're making. And that's a choice that you have to accept, that you are not the primary caregiver. You're also not that primary confidant of your child. This is really something you've traded out. And I think believing that having it all is a very... It's a facade. It's a mirage. It's not a possibility for anybody.
Right. Well, whenever people say that you can have it all, I think what they mean in terms of, well, these are the things we're going to judge you by, and you seem to have checked everything off the list, so you're good with us now. I mean, right. That could be, but that's just the way I think of it. But you're right. Unfortunately, there can be a bit of a trade-off. Because if a woman is able to if she has to focus solely on getting her business off the ground or, steering the mothership, she may have to neglect having children. And that's not the case with men.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Although it's interesting, I do think that they don't say as much. Women obviously are, unable to have children after a certain point, right? Where men are capable of reproducing. But I do think it's always interesting that they never talk much about the quality of the sperm count for men. The quality is really what it all boils down to. So to say that, oh my gosh, women in their 40s and 50s, you could have children with disabilities as a result of not high quality eggs. I think it's the same for men. It's just not as obvious, and it's not as talked about. So, yes, I hear what you're saying. Yes, it is easier, essentially for men as they age. But I don't think that it's necessarily something that you can just base it on the black and white. There's so much gray in that in between.
What do you think are women's in general? What do you think are women's strengths, and what do you think are inherent strengths in men? Are there? Or is everybody equal, more or less? I mean, when it comes, because I can say personally, I believe women are better at communicating than men are.
I think, gosh, that's a broad question, because I can say I know a lot of women that tend to have more what would be considered a male attribute. Some women can have much more male attributes, and some men can have more female attributes, in the sense that women typically, they say, are better communicators, right? And they say that women are more sensitive and more intuitive and are more giving. So I know men, though, that have those same qualities. There are not as many, but I definitely know of them. And on the flip side, I think it's it's easier for men to be very compartmentalized, to go into a job and say, this is what I'm doing. So to say, are they great multitaskers? I don't know. I think if you're really just putting it, like you said, very simple and very generically, no, men aren't really great multitaskers. Go in, do this job from 9 to 5, go home. They can do that and not necessarily always bring their work home, where I think women can tend to bring home their work mentally. It takes them a little bit longer to kind of decompress it. So I don't know, though. I guess when you ask the strengths, it's such a vague question, because I think of my father and I think of some of his strengths, because he was a very masculine, old school guy. And then I think of my husband and polar opposites. So it's kind of, I see strengths on both of them.
So your father, when you say he's an old school guy, he raised you, I'm assuming, to be tough. Am I right?
Very much so. So I lived with, my parents were divorced, and being that I had lived primarily with my dad, one of the interesting things about him, I don't think he would ever say he was a feminist. I think he's more of a closet feminist. He would never say that because, again, he was a farmer, very, very old school traditions, women stay home, even though that wasn't how his mother was, that wasn't his wife. That was just his nature, and very rough exterior, not the most warm guy. At the same time, a lot of his friends had sons. And I'll say, I remember very distinctly when I went away to college and I went to Boston, a lot of his friends were just terrified. Oh my gosh, you're going to let your daughter go away to college on the East Coast? You're going to let her go there? And initially I remember thinking in my head, like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, if you guys had sons, you wouldn't care where they went to college. Why do you care where I go? And my dad's response was, look, I have a daughter, but if I had a son, would I question him? So I want her to be able to make those choices for herself. And while, yes, it definitely scares me and makes me nervous because she's a girl, I also want to give her that opportunity and not give her I want to give her the benefit of the doubt and not necessarily make that decision up front for her. So I think his tough exterior rubbed off on me a little bit, and sometimes that can be a little bit difficult for men and for coworkers when I worked in the industry. But I wouldn't change it. I know a lot of women that have a hard time speaking up and speaking out. I was not that person. I was always that person that if I had a problem, I had no problems vocalizing it. But that, again, probably came from my dad.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that aggression and the ability to confront people it comes from biology with the production of testosterone. Mm-hmm. That makes I can speak from personal experience, that makes men very aggressive, and you rarely see women, although you do see it, but I don't see women giving the finger when they're driving. I don't see women acting out in instances of road rage quite as often. But to deny that do you think that women are just as competitive as men?
I think in a different way. I think if we want to go back to let's go back to our hunter and gathering instincts. I think men it was a simple job. Your job was to hunt as a man. You went out, your competition really wasn't another hunter. Usually it was just the animal. That was your only competition. So you would focus and zero in on that one job. Where women, I think, had a different type of competition. It was the gathering group. We're all gathering together. And are we competing in a different way? Because we are trying to all, provide whatever gathering materials, home, food, whatever, for our family and take care of our children. And I think, and competing for that great hunter, right? So back then, that really was what your focus was. I want to have the best partner, or the best mate. It sounds very primal, but it's a very innocent and simple thing that I think we still possess those qualities now. They're just in a little bit different atmospheres, right? So I think women still are competitive. They're still competing for recognition. They're competing for their prized hunter, whether that be their partner, their male, their job. They're still trying to compete. It's just in a very different form, I think.
Okay. So you're in nowadays, whenever I see like the Wonder Woman movie, and Mad Max, Fury Road. Those are two recent examples that I can think of where the women they were kind of touted as being feminist icons or feminist superheroes. Look, we're feminists. We're able to kick butt just as much as men are. But to me, personally, that doesn't really sound like feminism. That sounds like women acting like men. And is there an inherent difference in feminism other than women are just as aggressive as men, or we're capable of doing just as much physical harm to a person? Or am I just totally...
I think the concept then was and can be about women being too dependent on and too expectant of, well, we need that prince to rescue us. So you have all the Disney movies that were all about princes and all the fairy tales where the prince is going to rescue you. You're incapable of rescuing yourself and protecting yourself. You need this man to do it for you. I think those characters and those heroines of that you're mentioning, and the Wonder Womans and whatnot, I don't think it really had to do with women acting like men. It had to do with women remembering that, look, you can still protect yourself. You don't need men for that. And I think the important part of feminism in that standpoint is more about women relying on men versus wanting men. I think that there's two different schools of thought. Some men want to feel needed. I personally, more men than I talk to, would rather feel wanted. And I think those are two different things. Do you need a partner or do you want a partner? If you need a partner, you're desperate. You're you're trying to get this person. You're that clingy, annoying teenage girl that keeps calling your phone all the time. I need you. Versus, I want you. I want to be in a relationship with you. I want to be a team. And I think that's where those heroines of the 70s and 80s came out, to just remind women, like, look, you don't need them to be your prince in shining armor. It's okay to want them, though. And that's, I think, the part that oftentimes feminism gets a little bit skewed on the view of what exactly it is.
Right. Well, do you think that's ultimately a good thing for the family? I mean, because if a woman is able to say, well, I don't necessarily need a man, the man says, well, I don't necessarily need a wife, then there's not I think it's very important as a relationship and as a partnership. Right.
You need to need each other. It depends on what degree we're talking of need. Do you need each other to work as a team? Yes, absolutely. Do you need each other to survive? No, you're going to survive without each other. So I think one of the great lessons my father taught me, I remember growing up, one of the things he always said is, my job as your parent is to teach you to survive without me. And I think that's a very primal thing that's what animals do. That's what mammals do. They teach their young to just survive without them. And I think as human beings, we're not too far off the scope there. I think sometimes we get a little full of ourselves and a little arrogant and egotistical, believing that our children need us. No, they don't. Because if they still need you in their 30s, you've obviously not done your job as a parent. And the same thing should be in your partnership. You want to work together. You want to be a team. Because if you need it too much, you become a little too obsessed. You become a little overly dependent. And it takes away from the dynamics of what attracted you to each other in the first place, which most relationships that are successful that I've known growing up weren't people that were desperate for each other. They were people that chose as a team to work together and want to be better people for the other person. And I think that doesn't necessarily make someone a less qualified or a less good candidate to be your partner. I think it's just it's a natural progression that we don't necessarily talk as much about.
So if there's really no need for men and women, if men and women don't really need each other, do you think that could ultimately lead to less and less people getting married, less and less families being... I
think less and less people get married now. I think that if you look statistically,
is that a good thing?
Our statistics have gone down in marriage, mainly because marriage has gone, it's been unsuccessful, or there's been higher divorce rates. I think that the reasons for that have been, I think there's a lot of dynamics here. So I think we could talk all day and debate what the reasons might be. But you look back in pre-feminism, right? I think you got married a lot earlier. People got married quicker. And then you just stuck it out. Partially because financially you couldn't afford to not be married. What were you going to do as a woman if you divorced this man who could be abusive? He could be unfaithful. He could be all these negative qualities, but it doesn't matter because you can't afford to leave him. You need him again. So then you fast forward into our era, and people aren't getting married as quickly. They're a little bit more selective of who their partners are. And I think as far as the negative downfall now, people divorcing, I think sometimes it has to do with just not wanting to put in the effort and losing some of that romance and fantasy land. And as soon as it starts to get really hard, they immediately say, I don't want to be married anymore. Or I don't need, again, like you're saying, I don't need to be married anymore. I don't need to. But I think remembering too that in a relationship and in a monogamous relationship, a lot of that does have to do with making the effort to acknowledge that you're not going to be in love every day. I think that's an important thing that nobody really talks a lot about. Being in love is a fantasy. You're not going to be in love every day, but you will love that person every day. And that's, I think, the big difference. I think to say, like you were asking about, well, does it affect people's, the marriage rates by not meeting each other anymore? I don't think that really has as much to do with it. I don't think I think they're totally apples and orange comparison.
Well, I mean, do you think that we discussed earlier that now women have to work, and increasingly because prices are not going down for housing, for food, for gas, for utilities. So it seems to me that a partnership between a man and a woman would be beneficial to both parties. And nowadays it's like, well, men are kind of conditioned, because we're not conditioned to, at least I wasn't, to make it, as be like a Ronin, be like a lone wolf, going out and cutting a path on your own. That's dangerous. It's difficult if you don't have wealthy parents who are able to put up the capital that you need in order to start a business, let's say. The best way to make it in this world, I would think, would be to have a partnership with a woman. And it seems to me that several generations down the line, if things keep going the way they're going, marriage will be a relic of the past. And maybe it's time. Maybe it is time. I'm not saying that it isn't time, but it's just such a new notion, and I didn't see this world coming. And it's kind of like I don't know. It's a shock in the sense that our parents were wrong in instilling the wrong virtues or values that a man should focus on. I
don't think they're the same. I think that's harsh to say that they're wrong values, because there's the same values. If you break them down, your value is to provide for your family.
Correct. Your
value is to have faith, whether it be on a spiritual or religious or just faith in your partner.
Right, but
to have hope as a team.
But to what you were saying, though, I'm sorry to interrupt, but to what you were saying, it seems to me that the woman now has come to this realization that, holy cow, I don't need this guy. And They can, and obviously the guy has the same power.
Right.
But it seems to me that the women are more, if you look at statistics, women are much more likely to initiate a divorce. And it seems, and if women are being told that we can make it on our own, even though, the housing prices, the food prices, utility, all that kind of dictates the opposite, it's very, very difficult. And you will have to compete in an extremely scarce job market. It's becoming even, scarcer and scarcer. It's getting more and more difficult. And I don't know, it seems to me conflicting statements. You have women saying, yeah, we can make it on our own. And the facts kind of conflict with that a little bit.
Based on what you're saying, like financially being able to afford to be on your own is what you're saying?
And not only that, but you have women who, if a woman leaves the home or the man leaves the home, you've already divided society. And the people who are in charge, they obviously are not in charge by having a strong citizenry to headbutt against. They're in charge because they're able to divide the most amount of people and just get enough on their side to give them the power. If
Right.
you've already kind of created this conflict between men and women in the workplace or in the home and everywhere, it's divide and conquer, and the powers that be will continue to be in power. And
I mean, I don't know. I guess I hear what you're saying. I don't necessarily know if I agree. I think everything is, we all have choices. We're all born into this world with choices. And I think the difference between the women in the 40s, where you didn't work, you were at home, you were reliant, dependent, needing, desperate for this partner, you couldn't leave. You were there, hell or high water, you were there. And I think that the unfairness of that had, after about a good 50 years, has come to a point now where women are like, F this. We don't need that. We want the choice. And I think that's really what it all comes down to, is women wanting the choice and wanting their partner to be supportive of whatever that choice may be, and vice versa. Because I can think on the flip side, there's plenty of men that have wanted and requested and asked and had their partner agree with them or support them to be a stay-at-home dad. So what, does that make them less masculine? Does that make them less needed? No, I think, or less wanted? No. So I think at the end of the day, if you looked at that 50 years ago, a man staying home, that's foreign. That doesn't even make sense. So I think the progression in our society has come to, there's always going to be pros and cons. You can sit down all day and say, well, what are the bad qualities of this, of where we're at and how we've evolved? Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be some negatives to it, but I think we've got to find some of the really great positives. One being that women don't have to be so incredibly reliant on their partner. And if anything, there's somewhat of a relief on the male side to not feel the unsurmountable amount of pressure to be providing, like you were saying, and everything's very expensive, and the inflation of the cost of living, and to raise a family, that's a lot on one person. So I think, I don't know, that evolution isn't necessarily the bad thing.
so is the idea of romance, I mean, is that like a cliche, kind of like an antiquated, because it seems what is romantic if women don't need men? Is it like, is the man supposed to say, well, you may not need me, but I need you this much. Watch, I can cut my wrists this way. And you can do all these really wacky things to show what? To show that you're able, it used to be to show that you were able to provide because of, I don't know. I
think a lot of it now comes to, for women, and again, I certainly can't speak for all. I can say for myself and for women and friends that I've talked with, a big issue has been communication, that being the number one, and listening. And really listening to what your partner wants, instead of trying to anticipate it or guess or just assume. I think the assumption is there, where, I'm going to assume that my wife likes jewelry. Okay, so if we're let's just divide it, and girls like pink and boys like blue. Okay. Your partner says, you know what, this is my wife and I'm going to get her jewelry because that's what she wants. But not every wife wants jewelry. I'm a good example. My husband and I have been together for almost 16 years. Actually, next week it'll be 16 years. And ironically, a lot of folks that ask me all the time, does your husband get you a jewelry? No, but I don't really want jewelry. It's not important to me. If he gets it for me, great, but that's not what's important to me. What's more important to me is that he'll sit down and write a letter to me, or he'll make me cookies, or he'll do something that he knows that I like. It's something about me, and it's not necessarily about basing what the industries or what fashion or what whatever commercials are on, Jared's and whatever. It's not what they tell you. It's you've actually put a little bit of thought and a little bit of time and a little bit of effort into your gift giving, into reading my language. I think a lot of folks, I think on both sides, feminists and not, have read or heard of the book what was it? Like The Languages of Love. And I think that's a big part of a relationship, is reading your partner's language. Does that person need or want to be told I love you? Do they need to be shown it on a physical, affectionate way? Do they want to receive gifts? Do they need you to be, you know what, my wife would love it if I cleaned the house for her. That is that would be speaking her language. I love her so much, I'm going to do the dishes for her so that when she comes home, like, there's all these different ways that you can define what love in romance would be. And I think it differs from person to person. So, to say that, oh my gosh, have we taken it away by putting women in power and by allowing women to be these CEOs? No, I think it's all about, again, communicating and knowing that person and really wanting, do you really want to be in a relationship with this person and get to know her beyond her title and her income and or her passions and desires? Like, those are the parts that are going to define your relationship, not what statistics are going to tell you.
So the idea that a man would just want to take care of his wife is kind of an antiquated one. Am I right?
I mean, I think it's dependent. Again, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, because I think the flip side, it would serve on the flip side too. Even if a woman was at home, she wants to take care of her home. If she wants to work, she still wants to take care of her home or her family. There's still the very similar primal needs and desires. It's just skewed differently. It's just we're on a different playing field. We're not in caves anymore. We're in homes. So to say, is it wrong or is it crazy to think that a man wants to provide for his family? No. But is it crazy to think that a woman wants to provide for her family as well? I think everybody still wants to provide. It's just the definition of what providing is the part that becomes a little more fuzzy.
Well, it's weird because I've heard increasingly more and more often, if a man, wants his wife to have sex with him, maybe he should do the dishes or clean the house, and that's seen as a kind of a turn on. But it seems to go against evolution or biology, because in the past, if a woman wanted to have sex with her husband, she wouldn't go out and kill a caribou or something, or something like that.
In truth, men are very simple species. I mean, they're very simple. It's not a whole, you don't have to go out for a man mentally and say, I'm going to go kill a caribou for him because that'll turn him on. Men don't speak that language. Usually, for most men, their language is, hey, I got the goods. Do you want to have sex? Yes, that's all I wanted. Thank you. You don't even need to talk about it. You don't even need to show me anything. Just, yes, we get to do it. Women, it's a little more complicated, because yes, women can have sex. It's not going to, for a man to get an erection versus a woman, you don't have to have her turned on. You can just go to town and her not be in the mood. But for a woman to really want to connect and be in the same mood, obviously you're going to have to work a little bit for it. If you really want her to be there and to be in the moment with you and perform at her best, you're going to want to actually give her needs, or fulfill her needs, and speak her language. And if that means, go do the dishes or vacuum the house, do it. Yeah, if you want it bad enough, you'll do it.
So you mentioned that your husband is a feminist. Has he always been a feminist, or did he kind of gradually move in that direction?
No, I think my husband honestly was, he'll tell you, he was a feminist probably even before I knew what the word was. I mean, he grew up with his sister is a very hardcore feminist. I mean, just in a wonderful way. It's very independent. She's the kind of person that has said, and I love and respect the most about her, is her ability to say, look, if I'm single my whole life, but I know what I want, I'm not going to settle for something just because everybody thinks that that's what I should do. Everyone, oh, well, don't you think you should take down some of your requirements for a man when I want somebody that's going to make me laugh, or I want somebody that's also a feminist and that supports women in power and supports feminism and is an open feminist. I don't think that that's wrong. I don't think that's bad. I think some women that say, well, this is as good as I can do, that's a sad thing for them. Like, I'm fortunate I'm not that person, so I'm not on that playing field right now. But there's a part of me that feels, how could you be that way? How could you be so complacent, I guess? And for my husband, he had that role model as his older sister, and I think he found it to be really cool that there's a woman that doesn't, she really speaks her mind and really speaks out. And when he and I met, and that was a quality that I possessed, when he had told me, oh no, my sister's a feminist. Well, actually, he didn't say my sister's a feminist. He said the vagina monologues had come out. And I thought, I don't even know what they were. I didn't even hear about it. I mean, I'm from this podunk town, so I had no idea. And we eventually went and saw it together. And I remember thinking to myself, what guy? I mean, he was one of very few men in the audience that's sitting here, and he's like, isn't this the coolest thing? And I thought, wow, like that is hot to me. Like that is a turn on to me, that my husband wants to support women and honor them in a way that is, again, he doesn't put them up on a pedestal to say that a woman is better than a man, but to think of women as they're so much cooler than what we give them credit for. And I think as our relationship has grown and as we've been, we've had a family and had children together, I think it's only furthered his empowerment of women to see, whenever I had children, I mean, he'll be the first to tell you, I could never do that. I could never do that. Women are so much more powerful and so much stronger than we are to be able to sit down and say, yeah, I'm going to sacrifice my life to have a child. Where a man, it's, oh my God, I have a man cold, and it's a 6-week process to get better. So,
I mean, it's so he believes that women are. Does he believe at all that women are superior to men, or that they're just so kind of like mythical creatures?
I mean, I know he said it in sometimes. I don't think he necessarily means that in a literal stance. I think, like I said, he's always felt that women are stronger in the physical sense for creating and giving life. I think that to him is a really beautiful and awesome thing. I think as a woman, that's a pretty awesome and beautiful thing. But I don't, I've taught childbirth education for a number of years, and specifically on natural childbirth. And one of the interesting conversations I've had with a lot of other childbirth educators, the contradiction has been, I don't care what your husband wants. If you want to have a natural childbirth, that is all on you. Now, I'm a feminist, and I'll tell you that I do believe that women should have that right to choose, and they have a right to their bodies, and I believe in those things. However, when it comes to birth, I always say to women, look, this is your choice. Yes, ultimately you do get to decide how you want to birth this baby. At the same time, it helps when you have your partner and you're working as a team. Because again, if you put yourself at this high point and you look at the partner as insignificant and not important and really just a donor, so to speak. And I think this goes from male or female, whoever your partner might be, you are going to sacrifice that person really coming to your defense and coming to your, not rescue, but coming to your side when the baby is born and when you're able to care for this child together. You want this to be a team, and you want this to be a family, and you want to treat that person as though they're valuable and important, serve an important role. So I think, I don't know, I think that it's hard for me to speak on behalf of my husband, but I believe that he probably has the same view I do, that equality and there's no superior. It's just everybody brings something to the table, and when you all weigh it out, it does even out. It evens out at the end. Right.
I mean, that's I think what a lot of men are possibly afraid of feminism about. It's not egalitarianism. It's women uber alles. You know what I mean? Women are superior. It's not women empowerment so that we're equal. Right. It's women are empowered to take over. And I think that's what a lot, because it's...
And I think that's definitely something that I think when you really weigh it out, when you really look at what feminism is, and when you look at it by definition, and most women and people that are open feminists, that's really all they're saying is, I want the opportunity. I want that choice, and I want to be looked at as an equal. What you're saying, I think what's the difference in this hierarchy, in this patriarchal society that we've created for us right now, it's unfortunate because in that hunter and gathering period, tens of thousands of years ago, it worked. There was no hierarchy. It was no patriarchy. It really was, we are both contributing to this tribe, family, group, whatever you want to call it. We both are contributing. So as an example, I remember when I went to Africa in 2008, and we were talking with, we went on this safari, and then we had met with this bush tribe, or this bush group, And I was asking one of the translators that very question. I said, so women have to carry all this stuff. You have to carry the baby, you have to carry all this crap on your back. You basically are a Sherpa, and your husband, or this guy, is carrying a big stick, and that's all he has to carry. And I said, how does that work out? What a terrible burden on her. And what they pointed out was, look, it's not a matter of who's more valuable. It's what you're capable of providing and bringing to the table. He is faster. He just is. He is a faster person. So he is the hunter. So he doesn't need to carry all this stuff. He needs to be able to hunt and protect. That is his job. That's what he's good at. We need someone to protect the baby. You are going to carry the baby because that is what you're good at. And I think that's the part that we're really we're looking at now. In our society and in our era, we're still trying to picture this as, well, men or this job or this title makes you more valuable. No, it doesn't make you more valuable. It just brings something else to the table. If you look and measure what women do, and you measure how much women that did stay home and say, oh my gosh, were you really that valuable? Well, you cooked, you cleaned, you had babies, you did all this crap, and he just went to work all day. So who is more valuable? You're both valuable because someone needs to pay the bills and someone needed to take care of the home. Now, I think in where we're at today, it's remembering that, all right, if we both have to work, I'm still not going to go to work from 9 to 5 and then come home and be Superwoman. That doesn't make sense to me. I want to make sure that if I work from 9 to 5 and you work from 9 to 5, then we're both going to come home at 5 and we're both going to pitch in and work together. And I think men sometimes have come to that point where they've had it easy. They've had it really easy in that role and thought, well, I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to come home and cook and clean. I shouldn't have to. Well, you shouldn't. But you know what? If you think that, you're going to have a hard time finding a partner that's really going to be willing to put in that much effort.
Nobody should ever be taken for granted. And
exactly.
Yeah, I think a lot of a good case could be made that people being taken for granted are responsible for any failure in a relationship. But it kind of sounds like both are needed. It's not, you have to, you have to want to need them. Is that correct? Or do you have to, because it's kind of sounding like you're saying both parties are needed in a relationship.
Are necessary, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you have to want them. So you have to want to need them.
Right. You have to have that mutual without the desperation part of it, because I think, again, that's the difference. That was the shift in feminism from the 40s. It wasn't a need. Even if you loved that person, you were desperate. You had to hang in there because financially you had no skills. You could not leave the house. You couldn't do anything. So you had to need that person and hold on by the claws. Oh my God, what if this, it doesn't even matter if he cheats on me. It doesn't matter if he beats me. I can't afford to leave him.
Oh no,
Or now it's, no. Now it's, I want you to, you need each other by necessity in that we're both contributing. We're both throwing in our best. We're putting our best foot forward into the house. But I want to be with you. You're the I can get that from anywhere. You can get a partner that's not necessarily it's very platonic. I have a roommate that I live with, and then we both pay the bills. We split the bills down the middle. That's a choice. That's something that you want to do. Versus, do I want to live with this person that's basically not going to bring anything home and just be a big pain in my ass, but I need him because he's a man? No, I don't need that. I'd rather be single.
No, that's a good point. I mean, one thing I wanted to bring up is when men are not able to have children physically. So in the past, like buildings and roads and systems of government are patriarchal. That's what feminists refer to as the patriarchy. Am I right?
Say that again. What do you mean, the building? I don't understand.
Men have had the traditional role in history of creating like roads and buildings and societies, because I guess you could say that was compensation for not being able to physically have children, to bring life into this world. So they had to compensate by building for writing the Declaration of Independence, let's say, or something like that. My thought is that if you take the workplace away from men, what are we left with? Because women, we still.
See, that's the part that I think is an interesting, it's unfortunate that that's how it would be viewed, that it would be taken away from. If you look at, if you look at the representation of men and women, the masculine representation of men for war, men is war, if that's what you look at it, just on a very simple playing field, women don't represent war. Women represent life. Or if you say life and death, men represent death because men are all about war and competition, and women are about community, and women represent life. If you look at it on those 2 points, why would women be so negative and so hateful and so evil to say, okay, I want to take away from you. I want to steal that from you. If
that's life.
You're really representing it on a very, as you're saying it, on a very simple playing field. Men created these societies and they did all these things. Okay, well then let's break it down. If it's all about life and death, women represent life, men represent the polar opposite of death, then why would women, if they're such life-giving people, why would women say, I'm going to take away everything from you? That's not how it usually works, if you're really going to base it on that.
Well, but if you have a society in which a woman is in charge and their supplies and their resources are running low, are you going to have to, the woman is going to have to say, well, I'm going to have to take from over here because my people need to survive. And that's the way, it's not like men get some kind of glee out of, although some men do, I'm sure. But generally, it's something that is necessary. It's a necessary evil. Having to go over, there are finite resources in the world, unfortunately.
Right.
And men, we're typically in the position in the military to go and take those resources by force because nobody really wants to give them up willingly. And it's like, I'm not sure that it's an accurate statement to say that women are more capable of bestowing life than men other than giving birth, because women...
See, I don't really see that, though, as, like, when anybody says, because I think what you're really asking is how would a matriarchal society be better than a patriarchal society? You're comparing them as, which one is a better? And I think it's a difficult question.
Well, what is a matriarchal society? I
sit here and argue all day my selfish beliefs in the benefits of a matriarchal society, but there's that Buddha in me that also says that would create an out of balance homeostasis. So to say that one is better than the other, it's invalid. It would never be an even playing field. It would never be a balance in our life. So, all choices that we make have equal benefits as well as consequences. And I think that to say that we have to be willing to accept those downsides, I'd be more inclined to say let's try to find a way of being in balance and find the positives on both sides and try to create a new society that way, as opposed to saying it has to be one or the other. Finding that positive and enlightenment between the two can be a much more powerful and a longer life rate or whatever. We'll have a longer period to succeed than automatically assuming that one or the other. Because the other point that I think is interesting that you said is, if you look at historically, for thousands of years, did you ever read the book Ishmael from college? I don't know if you ever heard of that book.
I have.
It's a really cool book.
I know Ishmael from Moby Dick, but...
No, Ishmael from it was a philosopher, and I'm totally just going to lump up one whole book by saying, for tens of thousands of years, we did it as hunters and gatherers, right? We were able to survive. Yes, we weren't necessarily as largely populated as we are as a world now, but we were able to be in balance with nature. We were able to be in balance as other tribes and other families. And in just a short period of time, really, if you want to just base it on the last 5,000 years or 10,000 years, just since we've started to become more agricultural and more less nomadic, we've managed to really ruin and deplete all of those resources, as you were saying. We've really tried to, but basing it on this patriarchal society, where before in the hunting and gathering years, was it considered matriarchal or patriarchal? I don't really think either. I think it was, again, an equal balance of homeostasis in both in both matriarchal and patriarchal societies. There was no one or the other. It just was. And to now say for the last few thousand years, we've let it be this male-dominated, it hasn't done us any good. I mean, it has given us some benefits, but it's not to say that it's on the long scale, it's going to keep doing it the same way. We're continuing to lose resources. We're continuing to, there's more war, more murder, negativity, fighting. I mean, things that weren't part of the norm for a number of years. So I don't know. I just think that there's got to be some other way that we could try to work as a team and not as a competent competitor or
cooperate. Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. This the world has about 7 billion people in it, and if women were in charge of more things, I think the birth rates would go down because, as we've seen, typically the higher up the corporate ladder you are, the less children you tend to have.
Right.
So that could be an answer, but it's.
If we keep going at the rate we're going anyway, by having procreation and whatever. I mean, would that really be beneficial? Because we still, I mean, again, there's so much science of trying to figure out ways to fight death and try to see how long we can live. I mean, I'm not saying those things are bad, but we have to be realistic and being honest with ourselves that there are negative quality. There's negative parts to that. There's negative consequences to say, all right, we're going to live to be 100. Okay, that's a lot of time. If you look at our, 50 years ago, your life expectancy was 65, maybe 70 at tops. So you had a shorter time span that you weren't working and that you weren't helpful and you weren't contributing to society versus now, you're retiring at 65 and you're making it till 100. You really weren't even contributing that long. In fact, you were less contributive. You were less contributive to society than you actually were when you really break it all down. Let's say you didn't start work until you were 25. Now you've only worked for 30 years, but now you're going to be a menace to society or a cost to society for 50 plus years. I mean, that's a lot to expect to say that as women, oh my gosh, we're going to have low birth rates. I don't know. Is that a bad thing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you've ever been on the 405
to continue to have
5 p.m.
natural resources.
Right. If you've ever been on the 405 at 5 p.m., you will say, yeah, the lowering the birth rate is priority number one now. Well, there's a lot in this interview. It's been an incredible, invaluable, eye-opening experience. And I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.